An 82-year-old woman sits alone inside a house that holds almost nothing. Two worn dresses hang in her closet. A small vegetable garden grows behind her kitchen window. An old rocking chair creaks on the porch where she spends most evenings. She has no family left. No husband. No son. Just silence and the quiet rhythm of a life lived for other people. She doesn't know that today, that silence is about to break. Because somewhere on the highway leading into town, 50 motorcycles are closing in, engines rising like distant thunder, and not one of those riders is a stranger to her, even if she's never met a single one of them. The ground starts to hum before anyone sees them. Windows rattle. Dogs bark. Neighbors step outside. Phones already raised. Hearts already racing. 50 bikers roll into town in formation, leather jackets, dust-covered boots, faces unreadable behind dark visors. They don't stop at the gas station. They don't stop at the diner. They ride straight toward the smallest, most forgotten house on the block, the one belonging to a woman most of the town stopped checking on years ago. Some neighbors lock their doors. Others start filming, certain they're about to witness something terrible. Nobody expects what happens next. The lead rider cuts his engine first. The other 49 follow, one by one, until the street falls into a silence heavier than the noise that came before it. He swings off his bike slowly, like his legs remember this porch better than his mind does. He pulls off his helmet. And there, standing in front of an old woman named Grace Whitfield, is a face she hasn't seen in 12 years. He drops to his knees in her front yard, dust and gravel be damned, and looks up at her like a man who has rehearsed this moment 1,000 times and still isn't ready for it. "Mother," he says, voice cracking, "I finally came home. Before you find out who he is, you need to know what Grace did 12 years ago. Because what this woman gave up is something most people today wouldn't even consider giving up for their own family, let alone a stranger. She lost everything she had. Her jewelry, her furniture, her husband's land, and the whole town called her a fool for it. Stay with me, because by the end of this story, you'll understand exactly why 50 grown men crossed half the country on motorcycles just to kneel in front of one forgotten grandmother. And there's one detail I have to tell you now, because it matters more than anything else in this story. Inside that biker's wallet, folded so many times the creases have gone soft as cloth, is a letter. He's carried it for 12 years. Through job interviews, through hospital waiting rooms, through nights he didn't think he'd survive. Nobody in this story knows exactly what it says except Grace and the man who's now kneeling in her yard. But by the time we reach the end, you will. Before we continue this story, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. And if you're new here, click that subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. Here's what nobody in town could explain. Why did Grace refuse every single offer on her husband's land for years, even from buyers waving cash in her face? Why did she suddenly change her mind one ordinary afternoon? Who was the teenage boy nobody in town remembers seeing more than once? And why did he vanish for 12 full years without a single phone call? The answer to all of it starts with one conversation. On one quiet afternoon, outside a gas station, most people in this town have driven past 1,000 times without noticing anything at all. 12 years before 50 motorcycles rolled into town, Grace Whitfield was 70 years old and already a widow. Her husband, Walter, had passed 6 years earlier from a heart condition the doctors caught too late. Her only son died in a car accident 2 years after that, on a road not even a mile from their home. She had no other children, no siblings left, no reason, by most people's standards, to keep getting out of bed every morning. But Grace wasn't most people. Instead of folding inward the way grief usually demands, she opened her door to anyone who needed it. She paid hospital bills for families she barely knew. She bought groceries for a single mother 3 streets over after seeing her cry in a parking lot. She helped a laid-off factory worker land a job by walking into the manager's office herself and vouching for him personally. She covered school fees for kids whose parents couldn't. She kept a pot of something warm on her stove most nights because she knew somebody in town would be hungry, and she'd rather feed a stranger than waste a meal. She had one saying she repeated so often that people in town could finish it for her. Kindness is the only thing we leave behind. It started small. First, the jewelry Walter had given her over 30 years of marriage, sold quietly to a pawn shop 2 towns over so nobody would ask questions. Then the antiques that had sat in her living room since before her son was born. Then furniture, piece by piece, until her house started looking emptier every season. Each sale funded something specific. A surgery, a semester of tuition, a security deposit for a family about to be homeless. The town noticed, and the town did not approve. "She'll die with nothing," one neighbor said at the grocery store, loud enough for Grace to hear. Grace just smiled and kept walking. One piece of property remained untouched through all of it. A wide stretch of green land on the edge of town. The place Walter used to walk her to on Sunday evenings. The place where they'd planned, decades earlier, to build the house they'd grow old in together before life took a different shape. Developers offered her staggering sums. A church group asked her to simply donate it. She turned every single one away, always with the same quiet line. "One day I'll know exactly who it's meant for." The town assumed she was being sentimental, maybe stubborn, maybe both. Nobody guessed she was actually waiting. On an ordinary Tuesday afternoon, Grace was driving past the gas station on Route 9 when she saw a teenage boy sitting alone against the brick wall, knees pulled to his chest. His clothes were torn at the seams. His sneakers had holes worn clean through the soles. He looked like he hadn't eaten in days. And when she pulled over and offered him a $20 bill through her rolled-down window, he shook his head and pushed it gently back toward her. "I don't want a handout, ma'am," he said. "I just want a chance." Something about the way he said it stopped Grace cold in her seat. His name was Daniel Brooks, 19 years old. His mother had died 8 months earlier from an illness nobody caught in time because there was never enough money for the right doctor. His younger brother, only 14, was staying with a neighbor while Daniel tried to figure out how to keep them both alive. He'd been planning to leave the state, maybe the country, looking for any kind of work that paid enough to send money home. He had no plan beyond walking until something opened up. Grace looked into his eyes and saw something the town had stopped expecting from anyone his age. Not laziness, not excuses. Hope, stretched thin but still burning. She brought him home that evening, fed him a real meal for the first time in what he later admitted was over a week, bought him clothes that actually fit, listened to his story without once interrupting the way Walter used to listen to her. That night, after Daniel had fallen asleep on her couch, Grace walked out to the land on the edge of town one last time. She knelt down, pressed her palm into the soil, and whispered a goodbye to a dream she and Walter had carried for 30 years. The next morning, she called the buyer who'd been waiting 2 years for her answer, and she sold it. The town didn't whisper this time. They laughed openly. "She's finally lost her mind," someone said at church the following Sunday, and a few people nodded along like it was settled fact. Grace didn't argue with any of them. She used every single dollar from that sale on Daniel. A passport, a student visa, tuition for a university overseas that had a program matching exactly what he wanted to study, books, a plane ticket, enough left over to cover his brother's care while he was gone. She kept nothing for herself. Before he boarded that flight, Daniel turned back one last time and told her, "I'll come back for you." Nobody standing nearby believed him. If you believe people should never be mocked for choosing kindness over comfort, hit that like button right now and subscribe, because stories like Grace's deserve to be louder than the people who laughed at her. Life overseas broke Daniel down before it built him back up. He worked nights stocking shelves and studied during the day on almost no sleep. Classmates who came from money mocked his second-hand clothes and his accent. Someone stole his textbooks twice in his first semester, and he had to borrow money. He didn't have to replace them. There were nights he sat on the floor of his dorm room and seriously considered quitting, calling it all a mistake, going home with nothing to show for Grace's sacrifice. What kept him going wasn't pride. It was a stack of letters Grace mailed him every single month without fail. Those letters became the most valuable thing Daniel owned. She never wrote about hardship, even as her own house grew emptier by the season. She wrote about hope, about Walter, about the garden she was planting, about how proud she already was of him before he'd accomplished a single thing. One particular letter, the very first one she ever sent him, became something he carried everywhere, folded into his wallet, through every job interview and every late night that followed. That same letter would still be in that exact wallet 12 years later, the day 50 motorcycles rolled into Grace's town. Daniel graduated first in his class. A company noticed him before he'd even finished his final exams and offered him a position most graduates wait a decade for. Within a few years, he'd built something of his own, and it grew faster than he ever expected. He became wealthy in a way that would have sounded impossible to the boy sitting against that gas station wall. But he never once let himself forget who put him on that path. Every letter he sent Grace afterward came with money folded inside, money she quietly used to help someone else in her town, because old habits, the good kind, don't disappear just because circumstances change. Somewhere in those years, Daniel found a brotherhood of riders who didn't fit the image most people picture when they hear the word biker. This group existed to protect widows left behind with nothing, families one bad month from losing everything, veterans nobody else checked on, and children who needed somebody bigger than themselves standing in their corner. Daniel recognized something familiar in that mission immediately. He joined without hesitation. He earned respect the hard way, through showing up, through keeping promises, through never asking for credit. Eventually, the man who once had nothing became one of the most trusted leaders the Brotherhood had ever known. Do you think most people today would sell everything they own to help a complete stranger expecting nothing back? Let us know in the comments, because what Grace did next will test exactly how rare that kind of sacrifice really is. Word eventually reached the Brotherhood about the woman who'd given up her husband's land for a teenager she'd known less than a week. Daniel didn't have to ask anyone to ride with him. Every single member volunteered the moment they heard the story. "We're riding for the woman who believed in one of our brothers when nobody else would," one rider said, and that was the only explanation anyone needed. Quietly, without telling Grace or anyone in her town, the Brotherhood tracked down the exact piece of land she'd sold 12 years earlier. They bought it back in full, in secret, long before a single motorcycle pointed toward her street. While all of this unfolded behind the scenes, Grace had grown poorer than the town ever realized. Her house held almost nothing of value. Her clothes were the same 2 dresses she'd worn for years. But every single morning, she still walked into her small vegetable garden and picked whatever was ready to share with neighbors who needed it, the same neighbors who'd once called her foolish to her face. She never once said she regretted what she'd done. Not to her closest friend, not to herself in the quiet of an empty house, not even on the hardest nights when she wondered if Daniel had simply moved on with his life. When 50 motorcycles finally rolled into that town, every person watching assumed the worst. Locked doors, raised phones, Whispered warnings passed from porch to porch. Instead, the man at the front, now a successful business owner with a company employing hundreds of people, swung off his bike, pulled off his helmet, and dropped to his knees in front of a woman the town had quietly written off years ago. He called her mother, the same word he'd used for the only person who ever looked at him and saw more than his circumstances. He reached into his jacket and pulled out that same folded letter, still carried, still protected, exactly as it had been 12 years earlier. Then he placed something else into her hands. The deed to her husband's land, fully restored, fully hers again, paid for by 49 men who'd never met her but understood exactly what she meant to the brother kneeling in front of her. The neighbors who'd laughed at her, who'd called her foolish at the grocery store, who'd whispered about her losing her mind, stood on their porches in complete silence, several of them openly in tears. Grace didn't say much. She didn't need to. She simply placed her hand on Daniel's face the way she had the very first night she fed him at her kitchen table 12 years earlier. In the months that followed, the Brotherhood rebuilt Grace's home from the ground up, board by board, with the same care they'd put into tracking down that land. The property became the Grace Whitfield Foundation, a place dedicated to giving young people exactly what Grace once gave one terrified 19-year-old outside a gas station, a real chance. Children now laugh and run across the same grass where Grace once knelt and said goodbye to a dream she thought she'd buried for good. She finally understood, standing there watching them play, why she'd protected that land so stubbornly for all those years. It was never meant to stay in her family. It was meant to start one. One act of kindness may only change a single life. But that one changed life, given enough time and enough heart, can transform generations of people who never would have crossed paths otherwise. If you were Grace, would you have sold everything you owned for a stranger you'd known less than a week, with absolutely no guarantee he'd ever return? Comment below. I'm reading every single one. If this story moved you even a little, hit that like button and send it to someone who needs a reminder that kindness still finds its way back. And if you want more stories like this one, check out the previous videos on this channel.